The general rule of thumb in wrestling is that if you want to make it your career, then you need to start training at a very young age, ideally in your early 20s or even younger. But as with all things in life, some people out there just have to be different. The following 10 performers all started their journey to greatness aged 30 and over, which is basically middle age in wrestling. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 wrestlers who started their careers late. Join us! Number 10, Stevie Ray. Now, I'm not saying that Stevie Ray is a bad wrestling name, but when your real name is Lash Huffman, why would you bother going by anything else? Though he was never much of a single star, despite holding the WCW World Television Championship once, Stevie Ray's exploits with his brother Booker T as part of the legendary Harlem Heat tag team were enough to ensure that he will always be remembered. Though they initially feuded against one another in their very early days in the squared circle, Stevie and Booker were soon put together as a doubles act, which is how they would spend the better part of the next decade. Whilst the Booker man was 21 when he began his wrestling journey, Stevie, who was 6 years older than his brother, didn't get going until he was 31. When the team joined WCW in 1993, he was 35, which would have been considered toward the end of a wrestler's career at that point in time. Clearly, it was the power of brotherly love that gave him the strength to overcome those odds. Number 9, The Boogeyman. Marty Wright, the man behind the worm-chomping, clock-bashing, Charmel-scaring Boogeyman character, had quite an interesting entry into wrestling, one that actually played out on the 4th season of WWE's Tough Enough. Wright had entered the competition under a lie, telling officials that he was 30, when in reality he was a decade older. This was 5 years over the cutoff point, and when his ruse was discovered, Wright was sent packing. Somebody clearly admired his hustle though, as Wright was invited back and joined OVW as a new trainee at the age of nearly 41. The Boogeyman character grew out of his time in developmental, and less than a year later, he was at WrestleMania 22, facing off against Booker T and his queen in a handicap match. It wasn't a very good handicap match, but still, WrestleMania is WrestleMania. From a reality show reject to a company ambassador on a cushy Legends contract, Boogie has done incredibly well for himself, all things considered, and is living proof that if you really want something, then all you have to do is lie through your teeth. He also clearly worked very hard, but the important lesson is lying, I feel. Number 8, Bad News Brown. I'm afraid I've got some bad news. Different guy, I know, I just couldn't help myself. Bad News Brown was a late bloomer in general, as he also started his judo career at the relatively old age of 22. He would go on to win gold in the sport at 2 separate Pan American Games and would place 3rd at the 1976 Summer Olympics. He was also a bodyguard for Aretha Franklin, which must have earned him some serious RESPECT. Sod the lot of you, that was funny. And more importantly, easy. After quitting judo and leaving the Queen of Soul to fend for herself, Brown decided to give this newfangled wrestling malarkey a go, relocating to Japan to train under the chinstay himself, Antonio Inoki. This was in 1977, when Brown was already 34, but he took to the sport like a particularly violent duck to water. Though he would never win gold in WWE, he was a fixture of the promotion's midcard in the late 80s and early 90s, memorably facing Roddy Piper at WrestleMania 6 in a match that definitely wasn't overshadowed by the Hot Rod's, choices. Number 7, Shayna Baszler. Another star from the martial arts world who transitioned into wrestling later in life, Shayna Baszler is the modern-day equivalent of Bad News Brown, only she's never worked for a soul singer nor been in a dodgy feud with a man in a kilt. Yet. The Queen of Spades was involved in MMA prior to her wrestling career, putting her skills in Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu to good use. Whilst learning her craft, she would be tutored by the likes of Josh Barnett and Billy Robinson, both of whom had connections to the world of pro wrestling. After a disappointingly short run in UFC, Baszler decided that she had had enough of beating people up for real, so pivoted to the fake stuff instead. She had her debut wrestling match against cheerleader Melissa in September 2015, less than 2 months after her 35th birthday. It only took her 2 years to get noticed by WWE, who brought her in for the 2017 Mae Young Classic. She has since established herself as a solid member of WWE's roster. Now, she really is solid. In the she could punch you so hard your head does a 360 like the little girl in The Exorcist sense of the term. Number 6, Rico Constantino. We are going to talk about Rico now, which means that we also have to talk about Billy and Chuck, so apologies in advance. Lovebirds Billy and Chuck added a new member to their group when Rico Constantino joined them as their stylist in 2002. Though only with WWE for 2 years, Rico won 2 sets of tag team titles alongside Rikishi and then Charlie Haas, and once beat Ric Flair on a random episode of Raw for no apparent reason. Seriously, it's been about 2 decades and I'm still none the wiser. Rico had only made his pro wrestling debut 3 years earlier and had actually only competed in a dozen matches before WWE signed him to a developmental deal. He was 37 when this happened, and by the time he reached the main roster, he was in his early 40s. Perhaps not a shock given his history on American Gladiators and as a member of the Power Team. After leaving WWE in 2004, Rico went to All Japan Pro Wrestling, where he won another set of tag belts with Bull Buchanan, before retiring from wrestling in 2005 and going back to working for the Las Vegas Police Department. Number 5. Nyla Rose. As one of the first women to sign with AEW, Nyla Rose has been part of the company since its very early days, appearing on their inaugural Double or Nothing pay-per-view in 2019. Rose grew up as a huge fan of wrestling, telling her teachers at school that she wanted to become a stunt performer when she was older. She initially worked in film and TV before coming across a flyer for a local indie show one night and taking up the promoter's offer to get in the ring. This is what began her journey to one day winning the AEW Women's Championship. The native beast was in her early 30s when she got started in the business, and it only took her 6 years to go from absolutely nothing to being a flagship signing for a brand new multi-million-dollar organization. Since she started her training, she's also found time to star in a Canadian TV show called The Switch and co-write a comic book for Marvel. Yeah, well, I sleep in a racing car bed, Nyla. Do you? Number 4. Kevin Nash. Diesel, the great and powerful Oz, Vinny Vegas, oh wobbly legs. Kevin Nash has had many names across his illustrious career, one that didn't get underway until relatively late in the day. This behemoth of a man was initially a standout in college basketball, even moving to Germany to pursue a career in the sport. An injury to his knee ruined any chances he had of going pro, so he joined the army, worked in a car factory, and ended up running a strip club before finally turning his attention to pro wrestling. Nash was 31 by the time he made his debut in 1990, but his impressive size meant that no promoter in their right mind was going to turn him away. After 3 years of bopping around from terrible gimmick to even terribler gimmick in WCW, Nash joined the World Wrestling Federation in 1993, where he grew out his hair, put on some sunglasses, and started hanging out with some fellas who like to call themselves The Clique. They did alright for themselves, all things considered. Number 3. Goldberg. From Big Daddy Cool to the man whose undefeated streak he ended via cattle prod at Starrcade 98, Bill Goldberg also took a little while to find his true calling in life. Famously, Goldberg was an American football star before joining WCW, playing for teams in Los Angeles, Sacramento, and Atlanta before his NFL career came to an end in 1995. Big Bad Bill took on powerlifting and MMA after his football career ended, which led to him getting spotted by Sting and Lex Luger in a gym one day. At their suggestion, he signed up for WCW's training facility, the Power Plant, before making his in-ring debut at the age of 30. After that, well, you all know what happened next. Goldberg absolutely dominated the Turner-owned organization before moving to WWE, leaving for ages, and then coming back as a pensioner to win even more championships. Expect him to still be booked in Universal title matches up to the age of about 79. Number 2, Batista. Dave Batista and Bill Goldberg actually have a lot in common. They both went by their surnames, they both used the spear, and they've both been in movies, although Dave wishes he could have been in something as good as Santa's Sleigh. They also both got into sports entertainment in their 30s, though the Animal's pre-wrestling life was very different to that of his WCW counterparts. Batista grew up in a particularly rough area of Washington, D.C., and by the age of 17, he was living on his own and stealing cars. He found work as a lifeguard and nightclub bouncer, neither of which were especially glamorous or lucrative. One Christmas, after needing to borrow money from a co-worker to pay for his kids' presents, he decided that he was going to make a better life for himself. Age 30, the future Guardian of the Galaxy tried out for the Power Plant, where he was told he would never make it in pro wrestling. Luckily, WCW's competition saw his potential, and within 2 years of signing a developmental deal, he was on television as Devon Dudley's muscle-bound Deacon. Safe to say, he hasn't borrowed any Christmas money in quite some time. Number 1, Diamond Dallas Page. The ultimate example of a late starter in wrestling, and with good reason, is the world's most lovable yoga teacher slash psychotic stalker, Diamond Dallas Page. Page was involved in wrestling long before he actually stepped into the ring, working as a manager for the American Wrestling Association in the late 80s. He later moved to WCW, where he began managing Scott Hall under his Diamond Stud gimmick. Page would learn that the company were planning to move Hall on from him, so facing the prospect of losing his job, he decided to learn how to wrestle. At the age of 35, DDP was trained by a combination of Buddy Lee Parker, the assassin Jody Hamilton, and Dusty Rhodes. He made his debut in 1991, which marked the beginning of a truly special in-ring career. He captured several mid-card titles, had an all-time great feud with Randy Savage, and on April 11th, 1999, 6 days after his 43rd birthday, he won the first of 3 WCW World Championships. DDP's story just goes to show that it's never too late to follow your dreams, although if you're 81 and thinking about getting into lion taming, then that ship has probably sailed.